Have you ever wondered how people in the ancient world pictured their world? I mean, not as a globe with continents and borders, but more like a giant, sprawling family tree. Well, today we're going to dive into one of the most famous of these ancient maps, the Table of Nations from the Book of Genesis. It's this incredible attempt to chart out how all of humanity is connected, and it all starts with just one family.
So picture this. The world has just been through a cataclysmic flood. Everything's been reshaped, and only a single family is left to start over. That sets up a pretty massive question, right? How do you get from that one family back to a whole world full of different nations with all their unique languages and cultures? Well, this ancient text lays out a surprisingly detailed answer.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with how the world got repopulated. Then we're going to trace the three main family lines. That's Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And finally, we'll see how this whole account pulls it all together to explain, the origin of all the nations.
Okay, so it all kicks off with Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, according to this story, these three guys and their families are the ancestors of literally every person on Earth after the flood. You can think of them as the three main branches that this entire massive global family tree is going to grow from.
The text itself sounds like someone unrolling an ancient scroll. It isn't just a simple story. It's basically a census, a really detailed genealogy that lays out generation by generation how the world filled back up with people. It's honestly one of the most complete ethnic maps we have from the ancient world.
All right, let's jump into that first branch, the descendants of Japheth. Now, this group is generally connected with the people who lived along the coastlines and out across the seas. The whole line starts with Japheth's 7 sons. Now, to us, these are just names, right? But to ancient historians, each one was a link to a specific people or a particular region. They were essentially mapping out a world that stretched from what we'd call Turkey today all the way across parts of Europe. And it doesn't stop there. The family tree branches out very quickly into the next generation. It's interesting how the account makes a point to detail the sons of Gomer and Javan specifically. This isn't just a boring list. It's showing us how distinct clans started to form and spread out even farther across the map. So, the big takeaway for Japheth's line is this shared identity. They're called the maritime peoples. And that's not just some random label. It's a huge geographical and cultural clue, telling us these were the families who settled the coastlands and the islands, and that they developed their own unique languages and territories. Okay, let's pivot to the second son, Ham. And this is where we start seeing connections to some of the biggest, most powerful civilizations of the ancient world, including those in Africa and the Near East. Ham has 4 sons, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. And right away, some of these names should ring a bell. Mizraim, for example, is the Hebrew name for Egypt. And Cush is the kingdom we'd now place somewhere in modern-day Sudan. So we're talking about major players here. And then, all of a sudden, the genealogy takes this sharp turn. It stops being just a list of names and becomes a story. Because out of all these names, one figure gets his own special introduction, Nimrod. He's not just another guy in the line. He's presented as a mighty warrior, the first great empire builder of this new era. Apparently, this guy was so famous that this phrase became a thing. The text says it turned into a common saying, kind of like how we might say someone is strong as an ox. If you were powerful, you were like Nimrod. His name basically became the gold standard for greatness. And here's why he was such a legend. Just look at the cities that were part of his kingdom. Babylon, Nineveh. These were the absolute superpowers of ancient Mesopotamia. This genealogy is crediting Nimrod with founding the world's very first urban empires. But it's not all about Nimrod. The line of Ham also includes all the descendants of Canaan, and the text lists a bunch of well-known peoples that came from him, like the Hittites and the Amorites, placing them all squarely on this branch of the human family tree. And that brings us to the third and final branch of Noah's family, the line coming down from his son Shem. Now, this is a really important one, because this is the lineage that the ancient Israelites, the people actually writing this text, trace their own history back to. So, Shem's sons are also linked to some pretty major groups and places. Asher, for instance, gives his name to the mighty Assyrians, another one of those Mesopotamian superpowers. And Aram is connected to the Arameans who lived in ancient Syria. Okay, now, buried deep inside Shem's family line, there's this really fascinating clue, and it's hidden in a name, a guy named Peleg. His name literally means division, and the text flat out tells us why, because in his lifetime, the earth was divided. This is a huge hint, a bit of foreshadowing for a major event, the Tower of Babel, which is coming up in the very next chapter of Genesis. Shem's genealogy just keeps going, with tons of detail. It doesn't just give us names, it even maps out where they ended up. It mentions the clans of Joktan, for instance, and describes how they migrated and settled way out in the hill country to the east, in what we think today is the Arabian Peninsula.
So, we've traced the lines of Japheth, Ham, and Shem. We've seen the maritime peoples, the empire builders, and the ancestors of the Israelites. So what's the big picture here? How does the text tie all these threads together?
Well, the answer is right there in the very last verse of the chapter. The author doesn't leave us hanging. They wrap it all up with this clear, powerful summary statement that really drives home the whole point of this incredibly detailed family tree.
And that's it. That's the ultimate takeaway. The Table of Nations is meant to be an origin story for everybody. For its time, that's a pretty radical idea, this vision of a shared ancestry for a world that was already incredibly diverse.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? I mean, this text is thousands of years old, but it's wrestling with questions we still ask today about who we are and where we come from. It makes you wonder, how do these ancient maps of humanity still influence our modern ideas about nations and identity? And maybe more importantly, how do they remind us that we're all part of one single shared human story?